It's a franchise that has the unique ability to bring back good feelings of nostalgia, yet its existence as a whole isn't without some debate about how it's been handled over the past number of decades. And depending on your own personal experiences, you might either love it or hate it because its very creation is rooted in, well, let's just say, a lot of controversy.
Robotech itself is groundbreaking in so many different ways. In a lot of ways, kids were not ready for this type of animation. As a matter of fact, it was more popular with teenagers than it was with children.
In terms of its genre and overall appeal, it does well in terms of combining science fiction, transforming robots, apocalyptic level consequences, and complicated romances, all in a Japanese anime style that was then adapted for Western audiences. To set the stage for this discussion, it's important to mention that its production was handled by television company Harmony Gold, and Robotech's existence as a unique intellectual property is in fact a result of Harmony Gold unifying three otherwise unrelated Japanese series into one continuous storyline. As such, the initially released Super Dimension Fortress Macross of 1982, Super Dimension Cavalry Southerncross from 1984, and Genesis Climber Mospeada from 1983 were recut, dubbed in English with some story elements changed, and presented in a way for Robotech's 85-episode chronology to be told over 3 generations worth of characters. The result here is that the later parts of the story would occur decades after the earlier parts of the tale. But to do justice to the overall brand, it's important to start with that opening part of this extended saga, namely the first 36 episodes worth of scope, along with the characters, mech designs, and overall consequences from that first generation, which conveniently takes the Macross Saga name akin to the series that it was derived from. With that, let's have a look at the opening cycle of Robotech with this retrospective. So this is the history of Robotech, the Macross Saga. Let's begin.
The introduction of anime to North America was very, very slow. My first experience with anime was Force 5 with Grendizer, Guy King. Those were some of the first mecha anime to ever show up in North America. Most of them were done by a creator called Go Nagai, who was a very prolific anime and manga artist in Japan. And then we got into things like Voltron, and eventually we reached Robotech, which basically set the groundwork, because after it was revealed what Robotech actually was, people started to look and research more into it, and all of a sudden people wanted more of these Japanese cartoons to actually consume. And there was also a move by North American companies to start localizing and translating anime into formats that North American audiences could consume. How Robotech actually got into the scene was very interesting. The company Harmony Gold actually decided that it would be a very interesting move to actually bring over a Japanese cartoon called Macross. The problem was, although Macross was a completely full animated series from beginning to end, it didn't reach the actual minimum syndication requirement to become a full syndicated cartoon. So unfortunately, Harmony Gold actually didn't have enough episodes through Macross to reach the 65 episode minimum for a syndication at the time. Because of this, they decided to do something very unique. They decided to license 3 separate animes, Macross, Southerncross, and Mospeada, and join them together to actually create a full timeline from beginning to end. They hired a gentleman named Carl Macek to actually write the entire storyline and bring all these 3 separate animes into one cohesive storyline.
With the first 36 episodes of that storyline consisting of the Macross Saga, it's worth having a brief talk about the production behind the Japanese series in its originally intended form prior to its importation and narrative continuity blending with Southerncross and Mospeada. In fact, Macross's inception itself came from a collaboration of various companies. Namely, Macross was initially created by the company studio Nue, along with some help from animation company Artland. Tatsunoko would handle production, while advertising and sponsorship would be handled by Big West. Notably, designer Shoji Kawamori of Studio Nue is known for being an instrumental figure in the design and eventual creation of Macross. As for Robotech, which debuted on television in 1985, one aspect that complicated matters initially was that the plastic model company Revell had licensed the Macross mecha likenesses as part of their line called Robotech Defenders. And this was done prior to Harmony Gold's plans to import the various anime series over to the US. That said, this was all resolved since Revell and Harmony Gold agreed to a co-licensing agreement, and thus the Robotech name was adapted by Harmony Gold for the animated series that we're talking about right now. Further causing issues was that Hasbro, as part of their Transformers brand, had licensed the Macross Valkyrie transformable fighter as the character Jetfire. This would end up handcuffing Harmony Gold from making a transformable Veritech fighter for their eventual toy line with Matchbox. It also created a further messy situation whereby the Matchbox-produced toy would only be sold in its jet mode, and Hasbro ended up changing the cartoon aesthetic of their Jetfire character and also switching his name to Skyfire in the cartoon. In terms of merchandising, all this was less than ideal for Harmony Gold with their plans for Robotech. It would be left to fans in the Western world to either import the originally made Macross Valkyrie with transformable functions intact, or to patiently wait many years later to add them to their collections as adult-aged toy collectors. Through the years, Harmony Gold would prove to be a stumbling block for potential competitors on the market, and their handling of the Robotech franchise would make many fans irate as time went on. For instance, they'd put legal limitations and many times outright stop Macross releases outside of Japan, all the while not advancing the Robotech franchise storyline-wise themselves nearly as much as Macross was evolving as a franchise in Japan. That said, some streaming services would eventually start carrying Macross sequel movies and series much later on. Additionally, Harmony Gold would enter into legal disputes with FASA Corporation about FASA's release of Battletech items, given that the Battletech designs were also based on existing Macross designs. While FASA had felt that they obtained the rights legally, Harmony Gold had claimed exclusive rights to sell Macross-based merchandise in the United States, thus causing issues between the two companies. At one point, Harmony Gold went as far as to sue Hasbro over the release of the 2013 San Diego Comic-Con Transformers G.I. Joe crossover box set, which included a Jetfire Decode Sky Striker, feeling that some parts of it were aesthetically too close to the Robotech Veritech fighter. That said, the lawsuit was dismissed and Hasbro was able to continue with their product. But as this part of history is certainly unpleasant and in so many ways controversial, it's worth diving into the narrative of Robotech's initial Macross Saga story arc, as it's one that brings a lot of fond memories to those who've seen it.
The animation itself was, of course, top-notch. The way Carl Macek had actually written the entire storyline, there was a clear, defined timeline as to how the story would move about. As a matter of fact, the beginning of the series in Robotech, it shows the progression from Earth, traveling to the outer space, and the journey back to Earth.
And to kick off that journey from Earth, the story is that of a massive alien warship crashing onto the planet in the year 1999. With humans studying its technology, they find great scientific advancements on board and develop their own robotechnology, hence the series name. And robotechnology is what allows them to build mechs like the Veritech fighter, also known as the Valkyrie in Japan. The area where the ship had initially crash-landed on Earth would come to be known as Macross City, located on Macross Island, again taking the titular name from the original Japanese series. The ship, of course, would be known as the SDF-1, and the people of Macross City would restore the ship to its operating capabilities by the year 2009. However, the alien Zentraedi forces who were originally in possession of the ship ages ago managed to locate the ship on Earth and make plans to retrieve it. The ship automatically fires on the Zentraedi, and with the humans detecting the arrival of the alien fleet, all of this ends up starting the Human-Zentraedi War, also known as the First Robotech War.
So the Zentraedi are an interesting plot point. I mean, at the beginning of the series, all they're doing is searching for a lost ship that had escaped and landed on Earth. But we find out through the entire series that what they're actually looking for is love. they're actually looking to understand the relationship value of men and women, because they don't have that sort of relationship in their society. They also want to experience this. So several Zentraedi actually defect and shrink themselves down and try to integrate themselves. Many of them actually becoming obsessed with the whole idea of this person called Minmay and the songs that she actually develops. But as soon as they start realizing that, they have to work, they have to, integrate themselves into human society, they also start realizing that they're at a clash with their own, inert nature.
Being an alien species much larger in physical stature than humans, the Zentraedi are a culture who live almost solely for the purpose of war, knowing nothing about human relationships or the entertainment that human beings enjoy. This is why they are particularly puzzled by the existence of music, popularized by Lin Minmay aboard the SDF-1, or the personal contact between men and women. Ultimately, the reason the Zentraedi are hoping to reclaim the SDF-1 is because it contains a desirable source of energy known as the Protoculture Matrix. With Protoculture basically being the MacGuffin of the series, the Zentraedi need more Protoculture to further develop robotechnology of their own. Do note that this very definition of Protoculture is one of the deviations between Macross and Robotech. While it's considered as an energy source in Robotech, in Macross, Protoculture actually refers to a race of ancient humanoid beings. The heroes of Robotech are of course a foundational element in what makes the series so memorable. The main protagonist, Rick Hunter, also known as Hikaru Ichijo in Macross, is initially a non-military pilot who finds himself in a Veritech fighter and witnesses the horrors of war firsthand, then is quickly forced to adjust to what's going on around him. There's Roy Fokker, or Fokker if you prefer the Macross pronunciation, who's the leader of the Skull Squadron, and he's a very key pilot in the series that Rick refers to as his big brother. There's Lisa Hayes, or Misa Hayase in Japan, a pivotal character who's also the first officer of the SDF-1. Lin Minmay, of course, is a young girl who wins the Miss Macross Beauty and Talent competition before becoming a famous singer and pop idol throughout the course of the series. These heroes are of course supported by many characters, such as Captain Global, who commands the SDF-1, Claudia Grant, who's in a romantic relationship with Roy. There's pilots Max Sterling and Ben Dixon, who often accompany Rick when he's in the air, along with several key Zentraedi warriors and commanders who begin on opposite sides of the war to the humans, albeit switch allegiances by the end, such as Britai and Exodor, who come to admire the humans, as well as Miria, an ace Zentraedi pilot who's among those that voluntarily shrinks herself down to human size. There's also a slew of other supporting characters, both good and bad, not all of which we'll go through in detail here, as there's really a lot of them. And in regards to the key characters, there's a lot of adult-themed plot points that the story's writers certainly don't shy away from.
Something that happened in the series touched a lot of kids very, very deeply. The theme of death is actually something which did happen in Macross in a very big way. It was actually front-facing, it wasn't something that was shoved to the side. Roy actually does die in the middle of the series, leaving his girlfriend pretty much alone, and it forces Rick to actually have to grow up and become his bigger brother in so many different ways, because Rick actually has to take over his position as the leader of the UN Spacey Squadron. And this is really something that, at the time, I don't think kids were really ready for. It really did hit a lot of people emotionally.
Other losses would include the death of Ben Dixon, dealing a blow to Rick Hunter and Max Sterling's squadron. And the show would also deal with complicated interpersonal relationships between characters that were considered unconventional for a cartoon targeted at a younger audience.
Because there actually was a love triangle of sorts in the series, having to do with Minmay, who at first started off as a regular, average citizen, who actually ends up becoming an idol singer on the SDF-1, and of course the first officer, Lisa, who falls in love with Rick, who also has a relationship with Minmay, thus completing the love triangle. And it's an interesting interplay between women and men, which at the time was not very prevalent in cartoons, as those types of relationships were usually left to parents to explain, whereas this one really did tackle it head on, and in a lot of ways made kids sort of aware that these things were actually going on in the world around them.
This is further complicated by the inclusion of Minmay's cousin and career manager Lin Kyle, who, while belligerent to the people around him and to the military as a whole, he also displays a strange romantic affection towards Minmay. This is even further complicated by the fact that Lisa Hayes notices that Lin Kyle seems to physically resemble Lisa's deceased fiancé from before the war. Minmay is an interesting study all her own. While she's sometimes considered as an annoying, spoiled brat by fans, it's been admitted that she was partly inspired by the song Lily Marlene, which was popular on both sides of the war during World War II. And indeed, it is Minmay's music that's listened to frequently and meant to inspire both citizens as well as soldiers aboard the SDF-1. All the while causing confusion on the Zentraedi side, as some Zentraedi also adore her songs, while others simply cannot comprehend what they are hearing. Now, in many ways, the most pivotal relationship in the Macross Saga of Robotech would be that between the human pilot Max Sterling and the Zentraedi pilot Miria. While Miria is unable to defeat Max in aerial combat when they first meet, she asks to be reduced to human size so that she can go aboard the SDF-1 and have another chance at defeating and killing Max. And this is where the plot takes a significant turn.
They actually have first a video game battle, which is really interesting. Once she's defeated in that simulator, she actually pulls out a knife on Max. They go on to have an actual knife battle, almost like swords, which when you really think about it is actually kind of ridiculous. But he defeats Mira, and instead of killing her, which again is something that the Zentraedi would do immediately, he ends up falling in love, and they end up getting married and have a child. So Dana is born, and thus continues the saga.
Dana Sterling's birth would set the unexpected precedent that a human and a member of the Zentraedi could cohabitate and procreate. And Dana, of course, would take a starring role close to a generation later when the follow-up, Robotech, the Masters portion of the series takes place. Spoiler alert, by the 27th episode of the series, the majority of the Earth's surface is left completely destroyed. And the final episodes would see the survivors picking up the pieces to move on, all the while setting up the next chapter of the Robotech saga with the aforementioned Masters era. And it is this serialized storytelling with overarching themes carrying on between episodes that the series is largely known for.
So there really is a continual timeline from beginning to end, whereas most cartoon series at the time were very episodic. Even with G.I. Joe, it really was, the story of the week, and you would have a beginning of the story and you have the end of the story right at the end of the half an hour. In Robotech, it really was a very linear timeline, and you could literally follow it from beginning to end, and if you missed an episode, you probably would be a little bit lost if you didn't actually pay attention.
Ultimately, Robotech is something that is well loved by many fans, albeit it can be shunned by anime purists not only for Harmony Gold's treatment of the franchise, but also because not everyone is a fan of the English adaptation nor the unification of 3 separate series to meet syndication requirements for that time period. That, and it didn't help that sometimes Robotech would edit or tone down scenes of violence or nudity from the original Macross version. So there is naturally going to be an opinion out there that the Macross franchise is the superior one. Another interesting tidbit is that as a trial run before Robotech, a cut of the first several episodes of Super Dimension Fortress Macross was combined into a single broadcast for US markets. This was known as Space Fortress Macross, and it's basically a standalone extended trial episode that served as something of a marketing precursor to the entire Robotech project and franchise overall before the establishment of most of Robotech's character names. As a dubbed import, it's a little more faithful to the original Macross story, with the main character being named Rick Yamada, maintaining a Japanese last name like that of the original Hikaru Ichijo character, while also taking the first name from the eventual main character of Robotech, Rick Hunter. And as a side note, if you happen to be enjoying this video, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, press that like button, and ring that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future Toy Connections video content. Yes, it's a small effort for you, but it'll go a long way towards helping me with growing this channel. Additionally, there was a ton of merchandise manufactured for you to fill your Robotech needs. The aforementioned toy line by Matchbox came out pretty much at the height of the 1980s action figure craze. The figures were in that 1/18th scale, similar to what was already popular on the market with other lines, with the Zentraedi figures being larger to maintain some semblance of size difference like the cartoon, and the SDF-1 was also produced in order to give you a level of world building. Interestingly, some Robotech toys would return in the 1990s when Playmates released them as part of their Exo Squad line. All of this and everything we've discussed here already adds to the ongoing legacy of what Robotech means to its fans.
Being an anime fan myself, the legacy of Robotech is far-reaching. It really did bring this sort of more of an adult kind of attitude towards animation, which at the time a lot of the viewers were more or less teenagers who really latched onto this. And because of that, they started yearning for more action and more adventures with the Macross Saga. Unfortunately, Harmony Gold did not go much further than the original 3 series, and Carl Macek himself actually was the progenitor of Jap animation here in North America. He created a company called Streamline Pictures, whose first goal was to bring over feature-length animations to North America and actually have them screened in theater. Many of the movies he brought over are recognizable to any anime fan. Lensman, Akira, Fist of the North Star. Streamline Pictures, in a lot of ways, was an incredible look into anime. And like it or hate it, as many hardcore anime fans would say that the dubbing and the rewriting in many cases, because Carl Macek decided in most of his films to actually rewrite the plot to represent something slightly different or more palatable in his eyes to North American audiences. After people realized that the story had actually been rewritten to a certain degree, were not happy with the efforts of Carl Macek. Unfortunately, this is beside the point. If it wasn't for Carl Macek pushing anime in the West, I don't think we would have had as much penetration as we had early on, and we probably wouldn't be enjoying anime the way we did today. The legacy of Macross and Robotech really reaches far in terms of the overall anime roots. Many fans like myself, who had pretty much forgotten about Robotech years later, realize, hey, this is Robotech. Macross is Robotech. And that's actually how a lot of us ended up making that connection. And because of that, having watched the original version in Japanese, and of course the dubbed version in English, it really is a fascinating look at that sort of parallel.
No matter your feelings on it, Robotech did a lot to further anime awareness in Western markets, and whether you started referring to your fellow humans as Micronians, much the same way that the Zentraedi called them during the series, or if you began looking at all things Robotech and Macross outside of Harmony Gold's immediate scope, it's a franchise that certainly more than earned its place within the zeitgeist of 80s cartoon history. If nothing else, it tells a tale that has aged very well, giving it a lot of rewatch and revisitation value, even in modern times. And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another vintage retrospective that you can click on right over here, or to choose your own history topic from an existing playlist, you can click on that playlist right over here. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Take care.